"That car is dead," Vivian Hartwell said, and the room laughed because powerful people often mistake a polished sentence for the truth. The Hartwell Motors Gala glittered beneath a ceiling of crystal lights in downtown Detroit, every table dressed in white linen, every champagne glass catching gold from the stage, every investor leaning forward as if the future itself had been invited to dinner. At the center of that stage sat the Hartwell Aurora, a silver electric prototype from another era, its paint dulled by dust, its tires low, its windows clouded like tired eyes. A car once called impossible. A car once called the dream of American engineering. Now it rested under a spotlight like a body being identified. Vivian Hartwell stood beside it in a black evening suit, calm as winter, beautiful in the way a locked door can be beautiful. She was 35, CEO of the company her father had built, and she had learned to make hard decisions without letting her voice tremble. "Some dreams," she said, turning toward the crowd, "are better buried." Applause rose from the front tables. Grant Ellison, her chief operating officer, smiled with practiced sympathy. "A wise call, Vivian," he said softly, just loud enough for the microphones to catch. "Your father would understand." At the back of the ballroom, where the light barely reached, Caleb Whitaker did not applaud. His old brown jacket looked out of place among tuxedos and silk dresses. His boots had been cleaned, but not enough to hide the garage dust in the seams. Beside him, his 9-year-old daughter Maddie held a small sketchbook against her chest, her blonde hair tucked behind one ear, her eyes fixed on the dead machine under the lights. "Daddy," she whispered, "why are they laughing at it?" Caleb swallowed, and for a moment the sound of the room faded into the low memory of fluorescent lights, oil-stained floors, and a younger man standing beside that same car 12 years ago while Arthur Hartwell placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Machines do not die first, Caleb. People give up first." Vivian lifted a remote. Behind her, the screen changed to a rendering of the Aurora being dismantled, its parts displayed like museum pieces. "Tonight," she announced, "we retire the past." Something in Caleb's chest tightened, not anger, not pride, but a quiet grief that had waited too long to breathe. He stepped into the aisle. One waiter paused. Then another. Grant noticed him first, his smile thinning. "Sir, this is a private event." Caleb kept walking. Vivian turned, her expression sharpening as the room quieted by degrees. Maddie reached for his sleeve, but Caleb gave her hand a gentle squeeze and continued toward the stage. He stopped 10 feet from the Aurora, close enough to see the fine crack in the left headlamp, the same crack he remembered from the last night anyone had believed in it. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but steady, "that car is not dead." A few guests chuckled. Grant let out a breathy laugh. "And who exactly are you?" Caleb looked at the car before he answered. "A mechanic." The laughter grew warmer, crueler, easier. Vivian studied his worn cuffs, the calluses on his hands, the little girl standing behind him in a second-hand blue dress, and something like impatience crossed her face. A mechanic thinks he knows more than an entire engineering division. Caleb did not look embarrassed. He did not raise his voice. He only said, "Give me 30 days. Silence came quickly, then broke into scattered laughter. 30 days? Grant said. "With what? A socket wrench and a bedtime prayer?" Caleb's eyes stayed on Vivian. The chandelier light reflected in the Aurora's windshield, and for one strange second, the old car looked less like a relic and more like it was listening. Vivian stepped closer to the edge of the stage. 30 days will not resurrect a corpse, Mr. Mechanic." Caleb nodded once, accepting the insult without wearing it. "Maybe not," he said. "But truth has a way of starting engines people already gave up on." The laughter followed Caleb like a draft as he stood beneath the stage lights, but he did not let it enter him. He had learned years ago that mockery was only noise, and noise could not loosen a bolt, red a circuit, raise a child, or tell the truth. Vivian Hartwell folded her arms, her eyes cool and measuring, while Grant Ellison Walked down the stage steps with the careful confidence of a man who enjoyed putting smaller people back in their place. You realize this is not a county fair restoration project, Grant said. This is Heartwell Motors property, valued, catalogued, and scheduled for corporate retirement. Caleb looked at him. Then it has 30 days left before you bury it. A murmur moved through the ballroom. Maddie stood near the aisle with both hands around her sketchbook, trying to look brave in a room full of adults who made kindness feel expensive. Vivian glanced at the child, then back at Caleb. Something passed across her face, not sympathy exactly, but recognition of risk. Why do you care? She asked. Caleb turned slightly toward the Aurora. The old prototype sat in silence, its silver body faded under the bright lights, its front emblem dulled but still there, still holding the shape of a sunrise. Because somebody cared once, he said. And that should count for something. Grant laughed under his breath. That is touching. Completely irrelevant, but touching. Vivian raised one hand, and the room settled. She stepped down from the stage, her heels clicking against the polished floor with the sharp rhythm of authority. 30 days, she said. You will sign a release. You will work off-site. You will receive no funding, no factory support, no engineering team, and no access to proprietary systems beyond what legal approves. If you fail, you will appear at our shareholder press conference and publicly admit this was a sentimental mistake. Maddie's eyes widened. Daddy, she whispered. Caleb did not look away from Vivian. And if it runs? The question landed softly, but the room felt it. Grant's smile tightened. Vivian paused, as though the idea itself annoyed her. If it runs safely, under independent testing, I will acknowledge that you were right to ask. Caleb nodded. Not enough. A hush fell over the tables. Grant stepped forward. Excuse me. Caleb's voice stayed quiet. If it runs, you do not call it a corpse again. You say Arthur Hartwell's dream still had life in it. Vivian's face changed at the sound of her father's name. For the first time, her confidence did not disappear, but it blinked. You knew my father. Caleb looked down at his hands, rough from work, lined by years no investor had ever measured. A long time ago. Grant moved quickly into the pause. Anyone can read a company history page. Vivian studied Caleb more closely now, the old jacket, the steady posture, the way he did not beg for approval even while standing in a room designed to deny it. She looked at Maddie, then at the Aurora, then at the hundreds of people waiting for her to choose pride or curiosity. Bring the paperwork, she said. Grant stared at her. Vivian, this is unnecessary. Bring it, she repeated. 10 minutes later, a folder was placed on a cocktail table near the stage. Caleb signed where they told him to sign. No lawyer. No hesitation. Just his name in blue ink, Caleb Whitaker, written with the steadiness of a man who understood that dignity sometimes looked foolish before it looked brave. Maddie came to his side as the first guests began whispering again. What if they laugh again, she asked, her voice small. Caleb knelt so his eyes were level with hers. The ballroom lights softened around them, and for a moment the gala, the money, the judgment, all of it faded behind the face of the only person whose faith he could not bear to lose. Then we let the work speak louder, he said. Across the room, Vivian heard him, though she pretended not to. And for reasons she could not explain, the words followed her long after Caleb and his daughter walked out through the service doors, toward the cold Detroit night, where the forgotten car waited to be moved, and the 30 days began. By sunrise, the Hartwell Aurora arrived at Caleb Whitaker's garage on the back of a flatbed truck, strapped down like an old promise nobody trusted anymore. The driver looked at the building, then at Caleb, then back at the car with a doubtful squint. Whitaker Auto sat on the edge of Dearborn, between a closed tire shop and a laundromat with a flickering sign, its brick walls darkened by Michigan winters and its roll-up door groaning whenever the wind pushed too hard from the west. This the place? The driver asked. Caleb wiped his hands on a clean rag even though he had not started working yet. This is the place. The man gave a short laugh, not cruel, just honest in the way working men sometimes are when the odds look bad. Good luck, buddy. Caleb nodded. Grace does not always need a fancy address. Maddie stood near the garage entrance in her yellow coat, holding a roll of masking tape and a black marker like they were surgical tools. When the Aurora rolled down the ramp, she stepped closer with wide eyes. In the gray morning light, the car looked even worse than it had under the ballroom chandeliers. Dust hid in every seam. The left rear tire sagged. The chrome trim was spotted. Under the hood, wires hung in tired loops, and the battery bay smelled faintly of old plastic, cold metal, and time. Maddie touched the edge of the fender with 2 fingers. It looks sad, she said. Caleb lifted the hood slowly. Then we will start by treating it with respect. For the first hour, he did not turn a wrench. He did not pull parts. He did not rush to prove anything to Vivian Hartwell, Grant Ellison, or the crowd that had laughed at him. He only walked around the car with a clipboard, writing down what he saw. Front harness cut and rejoined. Cooling channel sealed wrong. Controller housing replaced with later model. Brake sensor bypassed. Each note made his face quieter. Not harder, not angry, just quieter. Maddie taped small paper labels to each wire as he called them out, her handwriting crooked but careful. High voltage orange, Caleb said. High voltage orange, she repeated. Ground strap left side. Ground strap left side. Outside, trucks rolled by on Michigan Avenue, splashing through slush near the curb. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed above them, and the garage warmed slowly from a small space heater near the tool chest. By noon, Caleb had removed 3 panels and found the first lie. A factory routing diagram tucked behind the glove box did not match the official service file Hartwell's legal team had sent over. Not by accident. Not by age. Someone had documented one version and built another. He stared at the 2 diagrams side by side until Maddie stopped coloring and looked up. Daddy? Caleb folded the service file closed. Somebody changed the story. She frowned. Can cars have stories? Caleb looked at the Aurora, at the faded sunrise emblem, at the machine the world had called dead before asking who had wounded it. Everything people touch has a story, he said. And sometimes the quietest things are the ones trying hardest to tell the truth. That evening, as rain tapped the roof in small silver clicks, Caleb unlocked the bottom drawer of his old red tool cabinet. Beneath tax receipts, a broken watch, and a photograph of Maddie's mother smiling beside a picnic table, he pulled out a worn leather notebook. The cover was cracked. The corners were soft. On the first page, written in a younger hand, were the words Arthur Hartwell said after the first Aurora test drive. Caleb read them once, closed his eyes, and breathed through the ache of memory. Then he opened the notebook to a page filled with sketches no one at Hartwell Motors knew still existed, and under the weak garage light, the dead car began to look less like a corpse and more like a witness. By the 4th night, the garage no longer felt like a place where cars came to be repaired. It felt like a small chapel built from concrete, steel, and patience. Rain streaked the front windows. The space heater clicked near Caleb's boots. The smell of solder, old rubber, coffee, and motor oil settled into the walls as if the building itself had decided to keep watch. Caleb worked under the open hood of the Aurora with his sleeves rolled to his elbows, tracing one wire at a time, one lie at a time, while Maddie sat on a stool beside the workbench cutting tiny paper labels from notebook pages. Day 4, she said, writing the number carefully. That means 26 left. Caleb smiled without looking up. That means 26 chances. She looked at him the way children look at fathers when they are trying to decide whether courage is something real or only something adults say when they are tired. Are you scared? Caleb paused, his hand resting on the edge of the engine bay. Outside, a car passed through a puddle, and water hissed along the curb. A little, he admitted. But fear is just a visitor. We do not have to give it the keys. Maddie nodded, as if that made enough sense to save for later. By day 7, the old service files had become a wall of contradictions. Caleb taped diagrams across the garage door in neat rows, comparing Arthur Hartwell's handwritten logic from the leather notebook against the corporate schematics Grant Ellison's office had approved for release. The official file said the battery management system failed from heat overload after 2 miles. Arthur's notes said the cooling loop could hold stable for 90 minutes under highway load. The official file blamed poor design. Arthur's notes blamed a missing bridge module. The official file ended the Aurora. Arthur's notes asked for one more test. Caleb stood before those papers in the blue hour before dawn, his eyes red, his jaw unshaven, his hands steady. They did not retire it, he whispered. They buried it before it could testify. On day 10, a courier arrived with a sealed envelope from Heartwell Motors. Maddie watched from the office doorway as Caleb opened it. Inside was a legal notice reminding him that the prototype remained company property and that unauthorized modification of proprietary components could result in immediate termination of the agreement. No greeting. No signature from Vivian. Only Grant Ellison's name at the bottom, printed in clean black ink. Maddie's face tightened. Is he trying to make you stop? Caleb folded the paper once, then twice, and placed it under a magnet on the tool chest. Some people think pressure proves power. Does it? She asked. Caleb picked up a socket wrench and turned back to the car. No. Pressure only reveals what was already inside. That same afternoon, Caleb found the empty slot. It was hidden behind the controller housing, covered by a plate that did not belong to the original build. 4 screw marks. A faint outline in the dust. A missing connection where Arthur's notebook showed a small stabilizing module no larger than a paperback book. Without it, the Aurora would never wake properly. With it, the whole system could balance. Caleb stared at the space, and the garage became very still. He remembered Arthur's voice from 12 years ago, warm and tired after a midnight test run. If anything ever happens to me, Caleb, remember this. The heart of a machine is not the motor. It is the part that keeps everything from giving up on each other. Caleb closed the hood halfway and leaned both hands against it. Maddie slipped off the stool and came beside him. Did you find what is wrong? He looked at the missing space, then at his daughter, then at the rain shining on the cracked pavement outside. I found what someone took. On the 15th day, Caleb stopped trying to fix the Aurora like a car and began listening to it like a memory. The missing bridge module was not listed in any official Hartwell archive, not in the legal files, not in the engineering packet, not in the sanitized history Grant Ellison had allowed him to see. But it was there in Arthur Hartwell's notebook, drawn in blue ink beside the words balance before power, truth before speed. Caleb sat alone at the workbench after Maddie had fallen asleep in the office under her pink blanket, the small lamp beside her making the room glow like a quiet promise. He turned the notebook page and found a date from 12 years earlier, March 9th, the night everything changed. Back then, Caleb had been 26, a scholarship kid from Flint with a talent for hearing problems before machines admitted they had them. Hartwell Motors had felt like another planet, glass walls, clean floors, badges that opened doors, men in suits who spoke in forecasts, and Arthur Hartwell walking through it all with rolled-up sleeves and grease under one thumbnail. Arthur never treated Caleb like an intern. He treated him like a mind. Tell me what the car is saying, Arthur would ask, and Caleb would listen to the hum of the cooling pumps, the rhythm of the relays, the small hesitation before voltage moved through the system. On the last test night, the Aurora ran beautifully for 87 minutes on a closed track outside Pontiac. Snow lined the fence. Steam lifted from coffee cups. Arthur laughed like a man hearing the future start for the first time. Then the main screen flickered, not from failure, but from a missing stabilizing command that should have come from the bridge module. Caleb saw it immediately. "The module is not responding," he said. Arthur frowned. "It was installed this morning. Then somebody removed it from the system." Arthur looked across the track toward the observation booth, where Grant Ellison stood behind the glass, younger than, smiling at a group of investors. 2 days later, Arthur was gone from the company after what the board called a health-related collapse during executive travel, and the Aurora project was frozen before Caleb could present his findings. A week after that, Caleb was called into a conference room and handed a non-disclosure agreement thick enough to feel like a door closing. Grant sat across from him with a gentle corporate smile. "You are young," he had said. "Do not ruin your future over an old man's obsession." Caleb refused the first pen. Then he went home to his wife, Hannah, who was pregnant with Maddie, and found a final notice from the landlord on the kitchen table. Medical bills. Lost hours. No savings. The world had a way of making dignity expensive. He signed the next morning, not because he believed the lie, but because fear had learned his address. Years passed. Hannah got sick after Maddie was born, and hospital rooms replaced test tracks. Caleb sold his tools once, then bought cheaper ones back. He learned how to stretch $1, how to braid his daughter's hair badly, how to smile when she asked why other families had more. But he never threw away Arthur's notebook. He kept it in the bottom drawer, beneath grief, beneath guilt, beneath the quiet hope that truth did not expire just because powerful people filed it away. Now, in the weak light of his garage, Caleb looked at the empty space inside the Aurora and understood. The car had not failed. Arthur had not been foolish. And the man who buried them both had spent 12 years hoping no one poor, patient, and stubborn enough would ever open the hood again. On the 18th day, the pressure stopped being subtle. It arrived in clean envelopes, blocked supplier accounts, unanswered calls, and one polite email from Heartfelt Motors informing Caleb that all remaining technical permissions were under review. By noon, the replacement capacitor he had ordered from a warehouse in Ohio was suddenly unavailable. By 2 o'clock, the independent testing appointment he had scheduled for the end of the month was marked pending corporate confirmation. By 4, 2 local reporters were standing across the street from Whitaker Auto, pretending not to take pictures of the old garage where a poor single father had dared to touch a billionaire company's forgotten dream. Caleb watched them through the front window while Maddie sat at the desk finishing her math homework. "Are they here because of the car?" she asked. "They are here because someone wants a story before the truth is ready," Caleb said. The bell above the door rang before she could answer. Grant Ellison stepped inside wearing a charcoal overcoat, polished shoes, and the kind of smile that made a small room feel colder. Behind him came a Heartfelt legal assistant carrying a tablet against her chest. Grant looked around the garage with theatrical concern, taking in the cracked concrete floor, the coffee-stained invoices, the heater humming beside the tool chest. "I will admit," he said, "you have made this little place memorable." Caleb set down his wrench. "What do you need, Grant?" "Company property protected from unauthorized risk." Grant's eyes moved to the Aurora, half assembled, its front panels removed, its wiring arranged with patient care. "You were warned not to alter proprietary components." "I repaired damaged ones." "That is your interpretation." Maddie stepped closer to the office doorway, her pencil still in her hand. Grant noticed her and softened his voice in a way that was not kindness. "Your father has put himself in a difficult position, sweetheart." Caleb's expression changed only slightly. "Do not use my daughter to make your point." For a moment, the garage became quiet enough to hear rainwater dripping from the awning outside. The legal assistant looked down. Grant's smile thinned. "Then here is the point. Heartfelt Motors is prepared to revoke the agreement unless you return the Aurora immediately for inspection." Caleb wiped his hands slowly with a rag. "Inspection by whom? Qualified engineers. Or the people who missed the missing bridge module 12 years ago?" The words landed like a wrench dropped on concrete. Grant did not blink, but something behind his eyes tightened. "Be careful, Caleb." Caleb took one step closer, not threatening, not loud, just present. "I have been careful for 12 years. Careful cost me my name. Careful cost Arthur his dream. Careful almost taught my daughter that silence means surrender." The legal assistant looked up then, as if hearing a different man than the one she had been told to expect. Grant recovered quickly. "You have no proof." Caleb looked toward the Aurora. "Not yet." Grant turned to leave, but paused at the door. The world loves a humble mechanic until he starts acting like a martyr. Do not embarrass yourself at the deadline. When he was gone, the garage seemed to exhale. Maddie walked to Caleb and slipped her small hand into his. "Is he going to take it?" Caleb looked at the car, at the empty slot where the missing module belonged, at the notebook on the bench, at the child who had already learned too much about adult cruelty. He is going to try. That night, Vivian Hartwell sat alone in her glass office on the 32nd floor, reading Grant's report. Fraud risk. Unauthorized tampering. Emotional instability. Public relations liability. Each phrase was clean, professional, and strangely bloodless. Then her phone buzzed with an anonymous photograph from outside Caleb's garage. It showed Maddie asleep in an office chair under a pink blanket while Caleb worked beside the Aurora with a flashlight between his teeth and one hand wrapped in a white bandage from a soldering burn. Vivian stared at the image for a long time. She had seen ambition. She had seen desperation. But this looked like devotion. And devotion, she was beginning to realize, did not behave like fraud. By the 22nd night, the storm over Dearborn had turned the streets silver and empty. Vivian Hartwell drove herself without security, without Grant, without the careful distance her title usually placed between her and ordinary weather. Her black sedan rolled past closed storefronts and sleeping houses until Whitaker Auto appeared through the rain, its old sign buzzing faintly above the garage door. Inside, light spilled through the front windows in warm uneven strips. She parked across the street and sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel, watching Caleb move around the Aurora in the glow of a work lamp. He did not move like a man performing for sympathy. He moved like a man keeping a promise even after the world had stopped watching. Vivian stepped into the rain and crossed the street, her heels splashing through shallow puddles, her coat darkening at the shoulders. The bell above the door gave a tired ring when she entered. Caleb looked up from the open controller housing, a small screwdriver in one hand. "Miss Hartwell. I came to see whether Grant was right. And I have not decided yet." Maddie was asleep in the office, curled beneath her pink blanket with her sketchbook open on her lap. Vivian's eyes moved to the child, then to the car, then to the wall of diagrams Caleb had taped across the garage door. She saw official Hartwell schematics beside handwritten notes, dates circled in red, voltage paths traced in blue, and in the center, a faded photograph pinned with a magnet. Her breath caught before she could hide it. Arthur Hartwell stood in the photograph 12 years younger, wearing a denim work shirt and a broad, tired smile. Beside him stood Caleb Whitaker, barely more than a young man, holding a clipboard in front of the same silver prototype. Vivian stepped closer. "Where did you get this?" Caleb set the screwdriver down. "Your father gave me a copy after the first closed-track run." Her voice became quieter. "You really knew him?" Caleb looked at the photograph as if it still had weight. "He was the first person in that building who asked what I thought before asking where I went to school." The rain tapped against the glass. Somewhere in the garage, the space heater clicked off, then on again. Vivian reached toward the picture but stopped short of touching it. "Grant said you were a temporary assistant who exaggerated your role." Caleb gave a small, tired smile. "Grant says many things." Neatly. She turned to him, and for the first time he saw less of the CEO and more of the daughter who had spent years confusing control with healing. "What happened to the Aurora?" Caleb walked to the workbench and opened Arthur's notebook to the page with the missing bridge module. Someone removed the part that allowed the systems to balance under load. Then someone rewrote the files to make the design look unstable. Vivian stared at the drawing. That is impossible. No, Caleb said gently. It is just painful. The words did not accuse her, and somehow that made them harder to bear. Maddie stirred in the office and whispered in her sleep, "Daddy can fix broken things." Vivian looked toward the child, and something in her expression softened with a grief she had carried too professionally for too long. Caleb followed her gaze. Her mother used to say broken things do not scare patient people. Vivian blinked, and the garage blurred for half a second before she forced the feeling down. She had spent years standing in boardrooms, saying her father's dream had failed because failure was easier to survive than betrayal. But here, under fluorescent lights, beside a sleeping child and a man with burned fingers, the story began to change shape. She picked up the photograph at last, holding it carefully by the edges. On the back, in Arthur Hartwell's handwriting, were 6 words. Caleb heard what others ignored. Vivian read them twice. Then she lowered herself onto the stool beside the workbench, no longer standing above him, no longer protected by the height of a stage or the silence of an office. "Show me the module," she said. Caleb opened the drawer beneath the bench and pulled out Arthur's old sketch. Vivian looked at it, then at the aurora, then at Caleb. Outside, thunder rolled softly over the city, but inside the garage, for the first time in 12 years, Arthur Hartwell's dream had another witness. By the 30th morning, the test track outside Pontiac looked colder than anyone expected, a long gray ribbon of pavement bordered by chain-link fence, wind-bent grass, and a sky the color of brushed steel. Hartwell Motors had turned the day into a controlled spectacle. Cameras stood behind marked lines. Engineers in navy jackets checked tablets. Board members gathered near the observation building with coffee cups warming their hands. Reporters whispered into microphones, already shaping the story before the car had spoken for itself. Grant Ellison arrived smiling, clean-shaven and calm, with a folder tucked beneath one arm like a verdict he had written in advance. Vivian Hartwell stood apart from him, wearing a dark coat, her hair pulled back, her eyes fixed on the silver aurora resting near the starting line. She had not slept much. The photograph from Caleb's garage was in her coat pocket, the 6 words on the back pressing against her like a question from the grave. Maddie stood beside Caleb near the car, bundled in her yellow coat, holding Arthur Hartwell's copied sketch inside a clear plastic sleeve. "Is everybody here to see it run?" she asked. Caleb adjusted the collar of her coat against the wind. "Some are. What about the others?" He looked toward Grant, then toward the cameras, then toward Vivian. "Some are here to see whether truth gets tired." Maddie thought about that. "Does it?" Caleb smiled gently. "Not when good people help carry it." At 9 o'clock, the independent test supervisor gave the signal. Caleb slid into the driver's seat while Vivian moved closer to the passenger side window. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cabin smelled of old leather, new solder, and cold air. The dashboard was dark. The steering wheel, restored but still worn at the edges, rested beneath Caleb's hands like something sacred. Vivian leaned down and said quietly, "If this fails, Grant will use it to bury everything." Caleb looked at the blank screen. "Then we let him watch us try with dignity." She nodded, but worry crossed her face. The supervisor counted down. 3, 2, 1. Caleb pressed the start sequence. Nothing happened. No lights. No chime. No gentle electric hum. Just silence. It spread across the track faster than sound, moving from the engineers to the board members, from the cameras to the reporters, from Grant's smile to Vivian's lowered eyes. Maddie's small hand tightened around the plastic sleeve. Grant stepped forward, already shaking his head with polished disappointment. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have respected this fantasy long enough. Caleb did not move. He listened. Not to the people. To the car. There was a tiny click beneath the center console, so faint most men would have missed it. Caleb closed his eyes, and 12 years fell away. Arthur's voice. The midnight track. The missing bridge. Balance before power. Truth before speed. Caleb opened the side panel and reached beneath the dashboard. Grant's voice sharpened. He is modifying it during the test. That should disqualify the result. Vivian turned on him. Let him finish. The words were not loud, but they stopped him. Caleb removed a temporary bypass that had been left in the housing like a bandage over a wound. From his jacket pocket, he took out the recreated bridge module, built from Arthur's drawings, Caleb's memory, and 29 nights of patient work. His fingers were steady as he slid it into the empty slot. Maddie whispered, "Please." Caleb pressed the sequence again. For 1 second, nothing changed. Then the dashboard bloomed with soft blue light. A low hum rose from beneath the floor, smooth and deep, like breath returning to a sleeping chest. The engineers froze. The reporters stopped talking. On the main diagnostic screen, a message appeared in pale letters from code Arthur Hartwell had written more than a decade earlier, Aurora lives. Vivian covered her mouth, not to hide shock, but to hold back the little girl in her who had just heard her father speak again. Caleb looked through the windshield at the open track ahead. She was never dead, he said softly. She was waiting for the truth. The Aurora moved like a quiet promise down the Pontiac test track, not roaring, not showing off, just gliding with the calm confidence of something finally allowed to become what it was made to be. At 20 miles per hour, the engineers leaned toward their monitors. At 40, one of them removed his glasses and whispered, "Stable." At 60, the battery temperatures held even across every cell group. At 75, the cooling loop performed exactly as Arthur Hartwell's notes had predicted 12 years earlier. No warning lights. No voltage drop. No failure. Only motion, clean and steady beneath the gray Michigan sky. Caleb kept both hands on the wheel, his face still, his eyes forward, while Vivian stood near the observation rail with the old photograph pressed between her fingers. Maddie bounced once on her toes, then remembered the solemn weight of the moment and covered her smile with both hands. Grant Ellison said nothing. His folder hung at his side now, useless as an umbrella after the rain had already stopped. When Caleb brought the Aurora back to the starting line, the silence was not empty. It was full of everything people had been too proud to hear. The test supervisor cleared his throat and read the numbers aloud. Range projection exceeded original estimate. Thermal balance within safe margins. Control system integrity confirmed. Independent test passed. No one clapped at first. They simply stood there, stunned into respect. Then one engineer began applauding, slowly, almost reverently. Another joined. Then another. The sound spread across the track, but Caleb did not bow, did not smile for the cameras, did not look toward the people who had laughed 30 days before. He opened the door, stepped out, and went straight to Maddie. She ran into his arms. "You fixed it," she said against his coat. Caleb held her close. "No, sweetheart. We listened long enough for it to tell us what was wrong." Vivian walked toward them with careful steps, as if every foot of pavement carried a memory she had misjudged. Behind her, 2 senior engineers were reviewing the restored data logs. One of them looked up sharply. "Miss Hartwell," he called. "You need to see this." The recovered system history showed a manual removal authorization from 12 years earlier, tied to an executive access code. Grant's access code. It also showed the erased diagnostic report Arthur Hartwell had filed before the project was shut down. Vivian read the screen once. Then again. Her face did not collapse. It clarified. Grant stepped back. "That data is incomplete. Caleb looked at him quietly. Vivian did not. So was the truth you gave me. The words were soft, but they ended something. By sunset, Heartfelt Motors had opened an internal investigation, the board had suspended Grant pending review, and every reporter at the track had stopped chasing the story of a foolish mechanic and started writing the story of a buried invention, a silenced engineer, and a single father who refused to confuse humility with weakness. Vivian found Caleb beside the Aurora after everyone else had drifted toward the press area. The evening light turned the car silver gold, and for the first time, the faded sunrise emblem looked alive. I said it was dead, she said. Caleb looked at the car, not at her. You were grieving. Vivian swallowed. No. I was afraid. It was easier to bury my father's dream than admit someone may have taken it from him. Caleb said nothing, and his silence gave her room to tell the truth without being punished for it. She turned toward Maddie, who was placing one of her drawings beneath the windshield wiper. It showed the Aurora under a bright yellow sun with 3 people standing beside it. Vivian's voice trembled, but it did not break. You did not just bring back a car, Caleb. You brought back the part of my father I thought I had lost forever. Caleb finally looked at her. There was no triumph in his face, only grace, tired and honest. Your father believed machines deserved patience, he said. People too. Vivian nodded, and the whole track seemed to quiet around them. The cameras lowered. The engineers stopped whispering. Even the wind softened against the fence. Maddie looked up at the glowing sky and smiled. Mom would have loved this, she said. Caleb closed his eyes for one breath, letting the words pass through grief and come out as peace. And in that silence, no one saw a poor mechanic anymore. They saw a father, a witness, and a man whose quiet dignity had done what pride, money, and power could not do. It had made the truth start again.